of Orlando, Florida, the most electrifying show in media, A Neighbor's Choice, is back. And I'm your host, David Gornoski. And no more fears, no more blame games. We're here to cut through all the groupthink and solve the problems that bug us all as neighbors, as individuals, not as some kind of tribal little minion looking to elect some kind of chieftain in Washington to tell you what to think, tell you what to do. We're past that. We're past that hateful ideology that says that human beings are not made in the image of God and that human beings can be treated in a violent way if it serves the greater good. That's a stupid ideology. It's ancient. It's old. It's so stinky. It's so moldy. It's so putrid. We should be revolted at the idea that we would still be discussing this today. That Ocasio-Cortez and her ilk, and I'm not picking on her. I'm glad that she's having a good time. Good for her. She's doing it at our expense, just like all the other congressmen and women. But I don't think she's not intelligent. I think she's smarter than most politicians. She's got 1 million followers on Twitter. Most of these congressmen, they're in it for glory and power too, and they've got 10 on Twitter or whatever, if that's what your thing is. So obviously she's smarter than most politicians or whoever her handlers are. But don't ever think for a moment that her ideology is somehow a threat to big business or big corporations. That's why big corporations in the form of media companies give her such lavish attention. If they were truly threatened by her ideology, you wouldn't hear a thing about her. And if you did, it would be very negative. It reminds me of Ron Paul. Ron Paul, congressman from Texas, two-time presidential candidate in the Republican Party, he couldn't get any media coverage. I mean, he would raise more money than any of the other guys. He got more donations from active duty men and women in the armed services than all the other Republican candidates combined. He'd sell out 20,000, person stadiums and colleges all over the country, including blue states. And you couldn't hear a thing about him on TV. And when they put him on, they just asked him stupid questions that had nothing to do with his policies. But with Ocasio-Cortez, it's nothing but lavish praise. So let me ask you a question. Who is truly a big threat to the big businesses that are rigging the economy? Is it Ron Paul, who represents the closest thing to pure free market-based society and rule of law? Or is it Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders, who represent supposed democratic socialism? Why is it that big business, if they're so scared, big money interests, as Beta O'Rourke calls it, he wants to get the money out of politics, he said. Why is it, if there's such a threat to big business, why is it that all the big corporations give them nothing but constant attention? Why do they get on all the daily, Ellen DeGeneres type programs and all these things, which are all sponsored by big pharmaceutical companies, big, wheat, big sugar, big human pet food, all that good stuff? Why are they all in such loving attention to these supposed threats to big business? It's because they're not a threat to big business. They're for entrenching their power. Ocasio-Cortez's Green New Deal is not a threat to big business. It's going to create trillions of dollars and hand them out to favored companies and crony groups like Solyndra, with a stupid idea of creating a cylindrical solar panel, total bust that the Obama administration gave millions of your dollars through. They stole it from you violently and gave it to these cronies. They're not going to nationalize everything into big government. They've got people that are paying them to basically rig a market further and further into a Stone Age idea. The idea that freedom doesn't work and the only thing that works is for an aristocratic elite to placate the masses and hypnotize them with rhetoric. I'm for you. Look at me. I quote rock stars. Look at me. I'm doing a live stream while I'm cooking. See, little peasant, I'm just like you. I chop potatoes too. Look, you don't have to worry about me. I'm like Mickey Mouse. I'll protect you. Look at me. I'm cutting the carrots up right now. I can't wait to put you in my stew. Yeah. That's how they are, That's what we're dealing with, Little Hansel and Gretel people, man. That's what we're dealing with. And of course, nobody says this on TV. If you go watch TV, most of the political candidates, most of the political pundits are going to say, oh, they're just socialists, big business works. What they're doing is they're lying. They're saying, look, what we have right now is free markets. No, we don't have free markets. They're slandering freedom. We don't have capitalism. We do have a rigged game. And so Bernie is a half-truth. Bernie Sanders is saying it's a rigged game. It's expropriating money from the poor and the middle class and giving it to the connected businesses on Wall Street. That's true. That's absolutely 100% correct. Of course, the solution is to entrench that more for the elites. But this is how they divide and conquer. They give a partial truth on one party and a partial truth on the other party. So the Republicans say, yeah, socialism's bad. It's like, yeah, that's true too. But what you're doing is just as evil. You're the ones that bailed out the Wall Street bankers to the tune of $800 billion with the TARP and had the audacity to have George W. Bush get up there and said, I am an advocate of free markets, and free markets have failed us. Capitalism has failed us. That's why I have to pay big bonuses to Goldman Sachs and all these guys on the Federal Reserve Board. He slandered the name of freedom for a whole new generation. Total cheap puppet. Because everybody listens to that, and so it's just like pro wrestling. They just take it on surface. They're like, oh, that's team capitalism. And even team capitalism with George W. Bush is saying it failed. So, hey, it's time to try some socialism. It's time to have some more, big government coercion. But that big government coercion doesn't give them socialism. It just gives them more entrenched crony corporatism, which was the thing that caused the crash to begin with. Do you see how it works, folks? The left and right in power in Washington, for the most part, are virtually the same. The more they have conflict, the more they become mirror doubles of each other. They're like that Looney Tunes crowd where they fight and it just becomes this amorphous cloud and you can't even distinguish the characters anymore. The same thing. And you know what we're like? We're like Bugs Bunny. We walk out of the crowd and we're just looking at them like, yeah, I don't even know what they're fighting because there's only supposed to be one person in there, but it looks like this crowd of chaos. That's what the left and right are. They're just mirror doubles. Now, Trump is different on some things. And I'm glad that he's been able to call the bluff on the establishment for their stupid Russia conspiracy garbage. That is an insult to anybody who is thinking in America or the world. The world laughs at the Russian conspiracy. Most of the world doesn't even take it seriously for a chance. And many Americans, thankfully, 50% now, there's some poll said the Mueller thing is a witch hunt. So that's good. And so for that, Trump is good. And there's a few other things he's been good on. He's questioned NATO. He's questioned some sacred cows. But don't depend on Trump to get you what you need. Because what you need to thrive is your right to your life, your liberty, and your property. That's what you need. And you're not going to get it from the top down. You're going to get it from the bottom up. You're going to get it by looking and finding the innovators who are using market forces and innovation, whether it's cryptocurrency as an alternative to the fiat currency of the dollar system, which is going to, if we keep printing money, we're going to have a massive dollar crisis on the horizon anytime, or whether it's alternatives in medicine that don't rely on FDA-preferred sick care that needs to be now, because of Bernie, sick care for all. This is what I'm so tired of. These guys are not for the sick. They're not for the ill. They are not for the poor. They are shysters of the classic kind. These are not the allies of the poor and suffering folks. Bernie wants to give you chemo and radiation and surgery that's going to be paid for supposedly by, government control, right? Well, I know people, as we showed last week, who are finding antibiotics to be 100 times more effective than chemo at killing cancer tumors. Antibiotics, which are generic, cheap, and they cost a couple bucks. Bernie's stupid sick care for all will not reveal that alternative idea for your cancer needs if you have a family member who has it. Because they're a bureaucracy, they're only going to entrench whatever the establishment line of thinking is in that bureaucracy, which has been cut, burn, and poison to deal with tumors. They do not care about your suffering relatives. They don't care about sickness. They care about their own power. It's the old classic story of mankind. We've been dealing with these charlatans for thousands of years. With that kooky witch doctor back thousands of years ago. Hey, come over here, folks. I'll sacrifice this weirdo and it'll make the rain come down. Or I'll sacrifice this old man who's too rich. And I'll sacrifice him and it'll make your famine go away and all the poor people will be able to eat. Yes. That we've been dealing with these freaks and these jerks for thousands of years. This is nothing new. It's not Karl Marx. Karl Marx was just another wannabe dictator, a loser who was jealous of what Jesus did in history, and he wanted his own messianic complex. He wasn't an ally of the least of these. He was a pimp for the rich elite who knew that people who are desperate and poor and don't have all the facts would buy into his garbage, cheap rhetoric. Well, we should spit on that. If we love our families and we love people and we want to have them have a better world where you can have an antibiotic from the market, that if we could just explore, and it's not being funded by government, it's being funded by private donations and contrarian oncologists, researchers, and biology researchers. That we can use diet and antibiotics to get rid of cancer. How many people are affected by cancer? How many people march in the streets for racial division? And what's really bothering them is this unconscious anxiety that the world is broken, that people are sick for no reason. How much strife and fighting and punching is because we've lost hope in the human ability to solve these problems, not keep us perpetually sick with symptoms. They don't want you to know this, but we do, and we're going to win. You're listening to A Neighbor's Choice. I'm David Gornoski. It's time for the revolution. It's happening. We'll see you in a moment.
Way down in Egypt land, let my people go.
David Gornoski here on A Neighbor's Choice Radio. 866-916-5400. That's 866-916-5400 if you want to call in. And I'm just exploring how our words matter. And it's important that we name our enemy of our civilization correctly. And the enemy is ultimately us, because it's up to us to take our time around the sun preciously and use our voice and use our minds to advance human liberty and excellence and virtue. Because you cannot have liberty if you have nihilism. As our last guest from Sweden, Olof, was talking about, what really broke his allegiance to the groupthink hive mind of democratic socialism in Sweden was just looking squarely at the degeneracy of the culture that it was connected to, the meaninglessness, the hatred of beauty, the hatred of self-restraint, the hatred of time preference, of being able to, I need to have what I want now, rather than waiting and enduring for a time for later value, later, benefit. That is the core principle of virtue. It's what the Bible teaches us. It's what we know in our hearts to be true. And we're going to lose all of that if we don't fight every day in our own sphere of influence, not just blaming, the Democrats, or blah, 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 blah. That's boring. Get to the heart of it. Don't just call them socialists. Call them crony corporatists, because that's what they are. What can Bernie respond to me, Bernie Sanders, when I point out that his sick care for all is going to keep people in the dark about outdated keep him basically stuck on outdated forms of cancer technology. Everybody in the real science, on the cutting edge of cancer, I'm just picking on this because this is a big deal for a lot of people, and it doesn't need to be. It needs to be off our backs. We need to be to breathe a fresh, relaxing feeling and think of cancer like scurvy, like it's not even a thing. But everybody in the actual science and biology on the cutting edge will tell you it's not a genetic disease as the textbooks tell you and as the, CBS News, drug companies tell you. It's a metabolic issue. It's a metabolic disease. It's dealing with your mitochondria, which is like your little energy batteries in your cells. And so someone like Bernie Sanders, if he has his way, sick care for all, when it's going to institute this big single-payer, massive bureaucracy that's still connected to private drug companies to some degree, they're not going to allow any freedom of some dissident voice to come in and say, hey, folks, I know you wanted to pay, hundreds of thousands of dollars in funny money printed out of thin air for these chemo patients, but really that's all not even working. That's outdated. That's like bloodletting from medieval ages or something. You don't even have the right frame of paradigm in mind. The new cutting edge research says it's metabolic, which means you're going to want to look at pathways like ketogenic diet therapy, as my friend Dr. Thomas Seyfried is exploring in Boston College. Using a ketogenic diet, which is non-toxic and is very healthy for your body, can also cure other related diseases to aging like diabetes and arthritis and inflammation and heart disease. That's a high-fat, high-healthy animal fat diet, very, very low carbohydrate diet, that you can do that in a therapeutic setting and have cancer tumors shrink and die. And then I have my friend, Dr. Michael P. Lasanti, in the University of Salford, using primarily funding from private donations, not government handouts like Bernie's buddies. And he's finding antibiotics like doxycycline. Doxycycline is a cheap generic antibiotic, and it just has no side effects. It actually is good for the good cells in your body, and it kills and destroys the cancer stem cells, which chemo and radiation don't attack. So with Bernie sick care for all, or Ocasio-Cortez, or all these other guys, and even the Republicans, you're just going to get the same sick care for all. You're not going to have a dissident contrarian voice. But all true scientific innovation happens with the Galileos. It happens with the person who says, no, the scientific consensus is wrong. It's not genetic cancer. It's a metabolic thing. It's use ketogenic diet, use antibiotics, use cheap things that cost $1. Not these ridiculous government schemes that are only going to keep us sick and keep us bitter and keep us despondent. That's what freedom is all about. Freedom comes first in the state of mind. If our minds are enslaved to mimetic desire, for envy, for coveting our neighbor's stuff, when we're enslaved to the desires of our neighbors around us, we want to have what the Joneses have. When we become enslaved to that, we lose sight of our human destiny for individual liberty. So tyranny starts in the mind. Slavery starts in the mind. If you abandon liberty, and liberty means not just material consumption, but actual self-restraint, self-renewal, being able to have the courage to say, no, I don't care what the TV says. I don't care what these silly people on TED Talk say. I'm going to look for the dissident. I'm going to look for the Galileo who would practically be put in the dungeons if he gets too powerful or says the wrong thing. I'm going to look for the Galileos of our time who defy scientific groupthink propped up by big government, who are actually solving problems. Because what does the public really want? Will they stand for $50 trillion government printing of money, which is going to cause your prices to go up, cause the economy to go into a nosedive? Will they stand for that if that's what they get as chemo and poisoning and killing and death and toxic side effects, debilitation of the body? Or if they go to freedom, they don't have to wreck the economy, and for $2 they can have antibiotics kill major diseases. Whoa, you're not hearing that in the debates. You're not being presented with this truth that markets can provide. Scary markets, if they actually were allowed to be explored with virtuous people like the people I know, would actually provide you curing of diseases like cancer, whereas the other fools will keep you sick and despondent and dependent on their disastrous, side effect riddled garbage medicine. It's up to you what you want to choose, folks. You don't have to play by their paradigm. They want you to have this paradigm where you're forced defending the status quo as if that's freedom. And you're lying to yourself. And the moment you bear false witness against yourself, you've lost the debate already. You've lost the future. The moment you start saying, well, no, I want what we have right now because this is freedom and free markets and capitalism. That's what America... No, this isn't capitalism. We have some of it left. We have slivers of it left. And that's where we get some innovation. But we don't have a free market, free society system. So be careful with how we deal with these charlatans in this primary season. They're not socialists. They're not for the poor. They're not bleeding hearts. If they were bleeding hearts, they would be looking at what I'm looking at. They would be saying, hey, I don't really think we need to. See, why is the argument, oh, we need to have government control over medicine? It's because these patented drugs cost so much, hundreds of thousands of dollars. Well, if that drug isn't even what you need, and you need something that's $1 or $2 per pill or whatever per round a month, then you don't need big government taking over your medicine. And the only way you'll know that is by having a free mind, a free heart, and a mentality that doesn't accept the status quo, the scraps of markets that we have, and say, well, this is what I'm going to defend, capitalism. No, it's not capitalism. It's not freedom. And the people who we're dealing with are not bleeding hearts. They're not caring too much. Make sure your language tells the truth when we deal with the debates of our time. They're not caring too much. They care too little. They're liars from the beginning. And they know who their father really is. You're listening to A Neighbor's Choice. We'll take a quick break. And on the other side, our friend from Israel will be joining us. Stay tuned.
Caught in a trap. I can't walk out because I love you too much, baby.
Sex wars. We are now in a battle. Sex wars. We're in a world that it's at war. With gender, race, and religious wars are intensifying, political disputes over nationalism and globalism are threatening Western liberty with a return to primitive tribalist mentality of collectivism. And now we're in sex wars. That's the description of my guest, Roy Barzilai, in his new book, Sex Wars, available on Amazon right now. How hormones drive gender, race, and cultural conflicts. Welcome to the program, Roy.
Hello, thank you for having me.
You're joining us from Tel Aviv, right?
Yes, right.
Well, thank you for being here. I know it's later over there, but I'm so glad you could join us here in Orlando. And I want to just dive right into it with you. Your book is interesting because you're proposing that basically the problems that we have in our society are turned towards collectivism, whether it's right-wing, ugly, nationalistic, viciousness like we see with alt-right stuff, or if it's the collectivist, overbearing, motherly archetype of the left, it's all due to testosterone, right?
Yes, of course. I suggest that civilizations goes through life cycles, cultural history changes, and it's a lot to do with hormonal and solar patterns of energy, of growth. When you have a young culture that's growing that wants to, like the culture that created the United States of the founding fathers, a culture of liberty, of high, strong family values, high birth rates, ideals of liberty, individual rights, culture of the reason, and that was the youth phase of the civilization. And then as it ages, it becomes a more collectivized, more corrupt, centralized, authoritarian, and then it collapses.
So what is the cause? What is the cycle pattern here that's happening so quickly? What is that connected to? solar spots, you said?
Yeah. You can see charts of sunspots. The period of the Enlightenment. The word comes from light, and we associate good things with light, like God is light versus Satan is darkness, because we inherently feel that we need light. The reason is that light provides biological growth on Earth depends on light for photosynthesis for the plants. And the animals depend on the animal food, on the plants for their food chain. So we are all we evolved to go into a growth mode, be more psychologically active, more euphoric, more optimistic, and that you see in the founding father during the Enlightenment. If you look at the charts, solar activity was rising rapidly during the 18th century, the century of the Enlightenment, the Age of Reason. So it provides the impetus for people to be more happy. And you see it in the Declaration of Independence. You have the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
What about the...
So it's well inherited in our psychology, and it influences our philosophy of life, our culture. And you see also very high birth rates, a strong masculine culture. The ideal of the founding father was that people are created in the image of God, and God the Father figure, who commands in Genesis 1, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and have dominion over nature. Is a dominance hormone also, so you feel dominant over nature.
What about the French Revolution? That happened during that time, and that was kind of a picture for what we have now with, violent egalitarian, movements like in social justice movements.
Yeah, well, egalitarianism is always has to do more with the feminine side, because men are more competitive. The high testosterone raises competitiveness because the males compete for the females.
Right, but you said that the Enlightenment era had a solar activity which created liberty, but it also had that French Revolution. So how did that happen?
Yeah. Yes, that's true. So if you look at the sunspot charts, you'll see that they peaked in 1776, actually right at the Declaration of Independence of the Founding Fathers. I think that gave them the impetus to fight the war for independence. And you see, like Benjamin Franklin states that rebellion against tyrants is obedience to God the Father. So this is a very strong masculine principle of individualism, independence, liberty, the fight for this all these ideals. And after 1776, you're starting to get the counter-enlightenment. It's called counter-enlightenment trends. And you have it in the French Revolution with the more egalitarianism, centralized control. You get the reign of terror during the French Revolution. It's very egalitarian, so they have the reign of terror. It's like the communist revolution.
So those years,
want everybody to be the same.
So those years during the French Revolution and the Communist Revolution, those were low activity of the sun, or they were just less? Were they active but not as active as the Revolution, 1776?
Yes, of course. The sun is always active, but
right.
It's less active. And from 1776, you had the period of the French Revolution. It's called the Dalton minimum. There was a minimum in solar activity, and it also caused the German counter-enlightenment, which brought us Kant, his critique of reason, anti-reason culture, anti-individualism with Hegel, Marx, and then Nietzsche, existentialist philosophy, which says life is dreadful. There's no meaning or purpose for existence. Life is actually evil. And Martin Heidegger was also a German counter-enlightenment philosopher, continued the existentialist tradition. They say God is dead, there is no meaning to life. And it all ended with the 1920s and 30s, the rise of Nazism and communism in Soviet Russia.
Yeah, and you also see...
That's the counter-enlightenment, anti-light, anti-God, anti-family, anti-freedom, anti-capitalist mentality that is caused, according to my theory, my research, from declining light and the falling testosterone, serotonin, dopamine levels is very important hormones, motivational hormones that motivate us. They also make us feel good. The social mood becomes depressed. So you get the Great Depression in the 1930s.
We certainly seem like we're in a depressed state of mind by the dominant cultural institutions of the West right now. Everything's about envy. Everything's about privilege and tearing things down and ripping everybody apart and silencing people and deleting them off of platforms. And there's a lot of hate and negativity. So is your research indicating there's a lack of solar activity compared to happier times?
Yes, actually, NASA provides this data and the sunspots. You see that we are in the similar period to early 20th century when World War I and II broke out. You see the solar activity is very reduced, even as low as 200 years ago, to even in the Maunder minimum, this period is called. So the people get very depressed, and you see people are depressed. They're fighting. You have a group conflict on gender, race, ethnicity, religious wars. Society becomes at war, and also you have the culture of submission. They want people to be in submission, so they love, like Islam in submission. You see the rise of Islamic jihad to conquer and submit against Western liberty and independence, and all this culture of individual masculine rebelliousness against the empire, like the founding fathers rebelled against the empire. And the opposite was in the French Revolution, and Napoleon became an emperor and wanted to conquer Europe under his empire. So you have the anti-empire and the independence nationalism, the nation state, and the opposite is the imperial cult, like we have today, the United Nations, globalism, which Trump is fighting against.
So, how long is this period going to last? Typically, is it various ranges of time, or do they have like a 40-year cycle average, or what are we looking at here in terms of what you're looking with a dark time of lack of solar activity connected in your correlation to this hyper emasculated big government time and collectivism?
Well, there are actually very good scientific data about, it's not a data, it's scientific predictions and studies about solar dynamo, how it spins and how it operates and causes the sunspot cycles that influence our life on Earth. So according to these models, this can be pretty long. It can last decades, even 50 years. So it's
50 years?
Is that exactly? But
you said 50 years?
We're already very low. Like we peaked, solar cycles peaked in the 1950s, and then you see the triumph of liberty again when the Western powers won World War II and they restored Western liberty. And also you got in the 1950s was very high solar activity, a lot of light. So you got again a masculine culture of like Ayn Rand published Atlas Shrugged in 1957. Was very high also family values. You got the baby boom generation in the 1950s, a strong capitalist mentality, anti-communist with McCarthy was persecuting communists. And in the 1980s also there was high solar activity. So you got again the Reagan and Thatcher capitalism and the fall of the Soviet Union in 1987. And since the 1980s, we're going one way down with solar activity. Now it's 2019, and it's already 30 years going down. So you see the effects. People are very depressed. The feminist revolution is now even turning against sex. They call all the anti-male movement, like castrating of males and the extreme radical anti-sex mentality. It's also a symbol of low testosterone. You have collapse in birth rates. Transgenderism is all connected.
Wow, we're going to take a quick break, but on the other side, we're going to get into how people can personally stave off this if this is affecting their ability to have liberty. You're listening to A Neighbor's Choice. I'm David Gornoski. We'll see you in a second.
I try to say goodbye and I choke. I try to walk away and I stumble.
Welcome back to A Neighbor's Choice Radio. I'm your host, David Gornoski. Hey, if you got a story that fits with the theme of the show, we cover science and innovation. We cover criminal justice. We look for the people, nonviolent people just like you, in the belly of the prison system for victimless, bogus crimes that our founders would be rolling in their graves if they saw what we're putting up with. If you have a story like that, or someone doing something courageous or interesting, or just a question you have, you can always email me, hello@aneighborschoice.com. That's hello@aneighborschoice.com, and I'll be glad to hear from you. And I'm here with Roy Barzilai from Tel Aviv, and thank you for joining me all from far away I've been to Israel, beautiful place, and I'm glad you could come on here. You've got the book Sex Wars, How Hormones Drive Gender, Race, and Cultural Conflicts. You can go to testosteronecivilization.com, and we're just exploring your thesis about how solar activity is correlated with moments of freedom and independence, limited government, love of family, and then when we have these solar downturns where we're not getting as much solar flares coming out, we get these kind of lulls, we get economic depressions, we get empires, we get big fascist and communist country movements, and we're seeing something like that, looks like you're saying, right now. But so for people, obviously they can't control the sun, but what about their own lives? You know, I just had a guest on earlier, Ulla from Sweden, where they get very limited sunlight, and yet they're in the thralls of collective, powerful government, whereas Florida, comparatively speaking, a lot of sunshine year-round, and we have one of the healthiest states in the American system for limited government. So do people need to get tanning beds or something? What's going on? You know, how do we prevent, culturally, where we can't change the solar activity, but maybe we could all get more sun exposure, right?
Yes, of course. I think it's very important to get sun exposure. The sun is the origin of life on Earth. We must get sun to grow, reproduce, and to get energy. And we are designed, we get vitamin D from the sun, we get higher serotonin, which is the most ancient and important hormone, I think, in the body. It regulates the social status, mood, sexual behavior, appetite, everything is connected to the sun. And testosterone, of course, rises by 70% in the morning when you are exposed to the sun.
So let me guess.
For half an hour in the morning.
So let me guess, sunscreen and sunblocker must have been invented when there was a lull time, a depressed time with lack of solar activity, huh?
Wow, you're doing great. Yeah, it was promoted in the 1970s when there was low solar activity, and you got the Maoist revolution in China, with China, and also second wave feminism, which is also anti-masculine in its inherently. So yeah, you're right.
Oh wow, man, I nailed that one.
And also you have always high energy food, like high fat foods. When you have a lot of testosterone, you feel dominant over nature and the animals.
Yeah, they had the stupid.
And, so you get these trends when the sun is down. People become more for animals, vegetarian, anti-testosterone, anti-cholesterol. Testosterone is made of cholesterol, as all the sex hormones are. And when you get a low-fat diet, you become deficient in testosterone as well.
Yeah, and you see the government pushing, if you see all over CBS, New York Times, they've pushed this week some garbage study about eggs are bad for you. And it's dumb. If you look at the study, all they do is a survey of self-reported facts, which you can screen out factors that would, give you more evidence for why someone's sick or something. But they're trying to say eggs are bad because they have high fat in it. Well, that's a garbage study that the big government establishment wants to keep pushing to us. Eggs are fine for you. Remember, like you just said, Genesis said, you can have dominion over nature. That doesn't mean subjugate it, but it means eat your eggs, right? Have a steak, for the love of God, right?
Yes, actually, according to anthropologists, our brain grew bigger when we started to eat meat in hundreds of thousands of years ago. So hunting, gathering, that's the reason that we have a large brain and a small intestines, because we can digest a meat in small amounts and have energy for all the day.
Well, the truth is hard to swallow, and that might be hard to swallow for a lot of vegans who they're nursing a lot of sickness. And you'll notice a lot of vegans will get very angry about eating people hunting. You'll see YouTube videos where someone's fishing for a small fish, and they'll put angry, deranged comments. How dare you kill that fish? Meanwhile, they want to sanction Russia and starve Russian families because of Putin, and they want to sanction and starve Syria. So they don't really care about human beings as much as they care about, small fish. So there is a derangement there we see, and I'm not saying people are deranged if they're eating vegan. I'm just saying there is a correlation with it. Seems like a lot of anger and bitterness when all you're eating is nutritionally deficient, highly toxic plant matter as your main source of fuel, right?
Absolutely. It has to do also with testosterone, because it's a dominance hormone. And when you feel dominant over nature, you have to subdue it and you exploit it. You need to exploit energy resource. You need to eat meat to grow and be strong and have the power of the muscles, the bones. And the environmentalist movement has to do with feminism, also ecofeminism is a deep ecology. The feminists love Buddhism, which worships nature.
Roy Barzilai, folks. He's Roy Barzilai, TestosteroneCivilization.com. Go get his book, Sex Wars, on Amazon. Remember, get your sunshine, eat your steak and eggs, and love your liberty, and love your family. And most importantly, love your neighbor as yourself, because that's how we become and imitate God. You're listening to A Neighbor's Choice. I'm David Gornoski. Godspeed. We'll see you tomorrow night.